The sun hung low over the Texas plains, casting long shadows across the small wooden chapel that stood at the edge of town. Inside, candles flickered against the fading daylight, their warm glow doing little to ease the tension that had settled over the small gathering of people. Jackson Cole stood at the altar in his best Sunday suit, the one he'd saved 2 years to buy, his calloused hands gripping the brim of his Stetson so tightly his knuckles had turned white. The Reverend shifted uncomfortably beside him, clearing his throat for the third time in as many minutes. In the pews, Jackson's ranch hands sat in their cleanest shirts, their faces a mixture of pity and awkward embarrassment. His mother dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, though whether from anticipated joy or present sorrow, no one could quite tell anymore. The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly forward. 3 o'clock had come and gone, then 3:15, 3:30. The whispers had started around 3:45, soft at first, then growing bolder as the minutes stretched into an hour. Jackson hadn't moved except to breathe, his eyes fixed on the chapel doors as if sheer willpower could make them open and reveal the woman he'd been waiting for. Before we continue with what happens next, if this story is touching your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more inspiring stories like this one to life, and it means the world to us. Now, let's see what destiny had in store for Jackson. Catherine Hartley, the banker's daughter from Houston, beautiful and refined, who had swept into his life like a summer storm 6 months ago when she'd come to visit her aunt in town. She had laughed at his jokes, admired his ranch, and said yes when he'd gotten down on one knee beside the creek that ran through his property. But Catherine wasn't coming. Deep in his heart, in that place where truth lives whether we acknowledge it or not, Jackson knew. She had sent word 3 days ago that she might be delayed, that the train schedules were uncertain, that her mother wasn't feeling well. He should have seen the signs then, should have recognized the careful distance that had been growing in her letters over the past month. Catherine had never really belonged to this dusty corner of the world, with its endless sky and hard-won dreams. She belonged to Gallus and society pages, to a life that didn't include calloused hands and pre-dawn mornings mending fences. The Reverend placed a gentle hand on Jackson's shoulder. "Son," he said quietly, "perhaps we should," but Jackson shook his head, still staring at those doors. Pride was a funny thing. It could make a man stand tall when everything in him wanted to crumble. It could also make him a fool, standing at an altar alone while the whole town watched. It was his mother who finally stood, her small frame somehow commanding the room. "I think," she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks, "that we should." The chapel doors burst open with such force they slammed against the walls, and every head turned. But it wasn't Catherine Hartley in her anticipated white dress and pearls. Instead, a young woman stumbled through the doorway, her clothes dusty and torn, her dark hair wild round her face, and in her arms, wrapped in what looked like a traveling coat, she carried a small child. The woman's eyes were desperate as they swept the chapel, and when they landed on Jackson, she moved forward with such urgency that she nearly tripped over her own feet. "Please," she gasped, her voice breaking. "Please, is there a doctor? My daughter. She's burning up with fever, and we've been traveling for 2 days." And I saw the chapel and thought, maybe someone could help. She swayed on her feet, and Jackson moved without thinking, crossing the distance between them in 3 long strides. He caught her elbow just as her knees buckled, and looked down at the small face of the child in her arms. The little girl couldn't have been more than 3 years old, her cheeks flushed with fever, her breathing shallow and rapid. "Doc Morrison," Jackson called over his shoulder, and one of the men in the pews jumped up. "I'll fetch him." 10 minutes. Jackson looked back at the woman, whose eyes were glazing with exhaustion. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked gently. "Emma," she whispered. "Emma, right? And this is Sarah. Please, we just need help. We don't mean to interrupt anything. She seemed to notice for the first time where she was. The flowers, the candles, the altar, and Jackson in his fine suit. Her eyes widened with horror. "Oh God, I'm so sorry. I've ruined your wedding. I should go." "You're not going anywhere," Jackson said firmly. He looked at his mother, who had already moved into action with the efficiency of a woman who'd raised 4 sons on a working ranch. "Mama, can you take the child? Get her somewhere cool and get some water." His mother's arms were already outstretched, and Emma hesitated for only a moment before transferring her precious burden. The moment Sarah left her arms, Emma's strength seemed to leave her entirely. Jackson caught her before she hit the floor, lifting her icily despite his own emotional exhaustion. "Reverend, I'm sorry, but I think we're going to need to use your quarters." The wedding party dissolved into organized chaos. The ranch hands cleared the pews and brought in fresh water. Jackson's mother disappeared with little Sarah into the Reverend's small home behind the chapel, calling out orders for cool cloths and willow bark tea. And Jackson carried Emma Wright, this stranger who had stumbled into his ruined wedding day, to a small room where he laid her gently on the Reverend's own bed. She was unconscious now, her face nearly as pale as her daughter's had been flushed. Jackson stood there for a moment, looking down at her, and felt something shift in his chest. Here was real need, immediate and undeniable, so different from the abstract hurt of being left at the altar. Doc Morrison arrived in a flurry of activity, his medical bag already open. He examined little Sarah first, his weathered face grave. "Scarlet fever," he pronounced. "She's in a bad way. The next 24 hours will tell. Then he moved to Emma, checking her pulse, her breathing, the bruises Jackson hadn't noticed on her arms. Exhaustion, dehydration, and unless I'm mistaken, she's been running from something or someone. The doctor's eyes met Jackson's with understanding. These two need care, son, real care, for more than just a night. Jackson didn't hesitate. They'll stay at the ranch, both of them, for as long as they need. His mother nodded her approval, already preparing to transport Sarah. But, Mama, Jackson said quietly, that wedding dress you made, think it could be altered, made into something smaller, maybe. His mother's eyes filled with fresh tears, but she smiled. 2 little dresses, I'd wager, one for now and one for when she's well again. The next hours blurred together in a haze of purpose. Jackson's ranch hands helped transport Emma and Sarah to the main house, preparing rooms, building up fires, doing whatever was needed. Jackson himself sat beside Sarah's bed through that first night, cooling her fever with damp cloths while his mother tended to Emma in the next room. Somewhere around midnight, Emma woke screaming, fighting invisible demons in her delirium. Jackson was there in an instant, and on some instinct he couldn't name, he took her hand. You're safe, he told her, over and over. You and Sarah, you're safe here. Nobody's going to hurt you. It took nearly an hour, but eventually her breathing steadied and she fell back into sleep, her hand still gripping his. He didn't pull away. There was something about the desperation in her hold that told him she needed that anchor, that small certainty in whatever storm she was fighting. Sarah's fever broke on the 3rd day, just when Doc Morrison had started shaking his head with worry. Jackson had been reading to her from an old book of children's stories, his deep voice stumbling over the words he didn't know, when her eyes fluttered open with real awareness for the first time. Mama, she whispered, and Jackson felt his heart crack and mend simultaneously. Your mama's right next door, getting strong again so she can take care of you, he told her. My name's Jackson. You're at my ranch, and you're going to be just fine. Emma recovered more slowly, not from illness but from whatever weight she'd been carrying. It took her a week before she could tell them her story, and when she did, it was to Jackson alone. Late one night when Sarah had finally fallen into peaceful sleep. She'd been married to a man in Kansas City, a man whose charm had hidden a cruel and violent nature. When she'd tried to leave, taking Sarah with her, he'd sworn he would find them, that she could never run far enough or fast enough. So she'd been running, working odd jobs, moving from town to town, until she'd made herself sick with the constant fear and exhaustion. I saw your chapel, she said softly, and I just thought, maybe God would be there, maybe someone kind would be there. She laughed bitterly. I didn't mean to ruin your wedding. Your wife must hate me. Jackson was quiet for a long moment. There was no wife, he finally said. She didn't come, and I'm starting to think that might have been the best thing that ever happened to me. Emma's eyes met his, confused, and he smiled. You gave me something to do besides feel sorry for myself. You gave me a reason to remember what actually matters. As the weeks passed, something extraordinary began to happen. The ranch, which had felt like a monument to Jackson's solitary dreams, came alive with laughter. Sarah recovered with the resilience of childhood, and she followed Jackson everywhere, chattering constantly, asking him about the horses and the cattle and why the sky was so big. Emma helped his mother in the kitchen, her northern recipes blending with southern traditions in ways that made the ranch hands beg for thirds at dinner. And Jackson found himself hurrying through his work each day, eager to return to a house that had never felt like a home until now. He tried to tell himself it was just kindness, just Christian charity to help someone in need. But his mother saw right through him. She's not Catherine, she said one evening as they watched Emma and Sarah feeding the chickens, both of them laughing at something. No, Jackson agreed. She's nothing like Catherine. His mother smiled. Thank the Lord for that. But Jackson knew the situation was more complicated than his growing feelings. Emma was still legally married, still technically a fugitive wife in the eyes of the law. And more than that, she was wounded in ways that went deeper than bruises. He saw it in how she flinched at sudden movements, how she went pale whenever a stranger rode up to the ranch, how she held Sarah just a little too tightly sometimes, as if someone might snatch her away. It was Sarah who changed everything, in the way that children have of cutting through complexity to simple truth. 2 months after they'd arrived, she climbed into Jackson's lap as he sat on the porch after dinner. Jackson, she said seriously, her small hands on his cheeks. Are you going to be my daddy? Emma, who had been hanging laundry, froze. Jackson felt his heart hammering. Would you like that, little bit? He asked gently. Sarah nodded emphatically. Mama needs a husband who's nice, and I need a daddy who has horses. You have horses, and you're nice. So it makes sense. The logic was irrefutable. Emma was crying silently, her hands still gripping the sheet she'd been hanging. Jackson stood, setting Sarah down gently. Why don't you go help Grandma Pearl with dessert, he suggested, and Sarah scampered off, oblivious to the tension she'd created. Jackson walked slowly to where Emma stood. Emma, he said quietly, I know this is complicated. I know you've got a husband, in law, if not in any way that matters. I know you're scared, and you've got every right to be. He took a breath. But I want you to know something. I fell in love with you somewhere between you crashing my wedding and Sarah asking me to read Goldilocks for the 100th time. I fell in love with the way you hum when you cook, and how you look at the sunset like you're seeing it for the first time every evening. I fell in love with your strength and your gentleness and the way you made this ranch feel like a home. Emma was shaking her head, tears streaming down her face. Jackson, I can't ask you to take on my problems. If he finds us, if he comes here, Jackson stepped closer. Then he'll find out what it means to threaten something I love. Emma, I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I know it's not legal, not yet, but I'm asking you to stay. I'm asking you to let me protect you and Sarah, to let me court you proper when the time is right. I'm asking you to give me a chance to show you what love is supposed to look like. Emma collapsed against him, and he held her while she sobbed out months of fear and exhaustion and desperate hope. I'm so tired of running, she whispered. Then stop, Jackson said simply. Stop running. Stay here. Let this be home. If you're feeling the emotion of this moment, I want to ask you something from the heart. Take a second right now and hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's waiting for their own miracle. Someone who needs to be reminded that broken paths can lead to beautiful destinations. And don't forget to subscribe, because we share stories like this every week. Stories that remind us love is worth waiting for. Your support keeps these stories alive. Now, let's see how Jackson and Emma's journey continues. The decision to stay brought its own challenges. Doc Morrison quietly helped them contact a lawyer in Houston, a good man who specialized in what he delicately called unfortunate marital situations. The process would be long, he warned. They would need to prove abandonment, cruelty, gather evidence. It could take a year, maybe more. Emma despaired, but Jackson was patient. I waited at that altar for hours, he reminded her. I can wait however long it takes for something real. In the meantime, they built a life in the spaces where the law couldn't reach. Emma and Sarah officially became the ranch's housekeepers, an arrangement that fooled exactly no one but provided a veneer of propriety. Jackson built Sarah a swing under the old oak tree and taught her to ride on the gentlest mare in his stable. Emma learned to help with the ranch books, her neat handwriting replacing Jackson's scrawl, her head for numbers helping them plan better, grow smarter. The ranch hands who had felt sorry for Jackson on that humiliating wedding day now looked at him with something like envy. Boss found himself a real partner, they'd say. Watching Emma work beside Jackson to birth a difficult calf, or seeing how she could calm a spooked horse with nothing but a steady voice. The town gossips clucked their tongues, but Jackson's mother shut down any cruel talk with a few well-chosen words about Christian charity and the parable of the Good Samaritan. And slowly, month by month, the raw edges of trauma began to smooth for Emma. She stopped flinching quite so often. Her nightmares grew less frequent. She laughed more easily, her whole face transforming with joy. Jackson watched her healing the way he might watch spring returning after a hard winter, patient and grateful. The crisis came, as Jackson had known it eventually would, 14 months after Emma had crashed through those chapel doors. A man arrived at the ranch, well-dressed and smooth-talking, asking after a woman and child matching Emma and Sarah's description. Jackson met him at the gate, deliberately positioning himself so the man never made it past the entrance. I don't know what you're talking about, Jackson said evenly, though his hand rested on the rifle across his saddle. I suggest you move along. The man's smile was cold. I'm a private investigator, working for a Mr. Daniel Wright. He's looking for his wife and daughter. Last traced, heading southwest. Now, you can make this easy. Or Jackson cut him off, or what? You'll trespass on my property, threaten my household. I know the sheriff real well. You want to try your luck. The investigator's eyes narrowed, but he was smart enough to recognize a losing position. Mr. Wright is a determined man. He won't give up. Jackson leaned forward in his saddle. Then you tell Mr. Wright that his wife has filed for legal separation in the state of Texas, citing cruelty and abandonment. Tell him she has got witnesses and a lawyer and a judge who takes a dim view of men who beat their wives. Tell him that if he comes anywhere near this ranch, he'll be met with both legal action and whatever else is necessary to protect innocent people. And tell him, Jackson's voice went cold as winter stone, that some things, once lost, can't never be found again, not by him. The investigator left, but the encounter shook Emma badly. Jackson found her that night in Sarah's room, holding her sleeping daughter and crying silently. He sat beside her, and after a moment, she leaned against his shoulder. I'm so sorry I brought this to you, she whispered. I'm sorry I crashed your wedding, ruined your plans, brought danger to your door. Jackson was quiet for a long moment, looking at Sarah's peaceful face. Then he said, You want to know something? Catherine sent me a letter, about 6 months back, apologizing for leaving me at the altar. She married some banker's son in Houston, lives in a mansion now, goes to the opera. He felt Emma stiffen, but he continued, and reading that letter, all I could think was how grateful I was that she didn't show up, because if she had, I would have married her, and I would have spent my whole life never knowing what I was missing. I would have had a wife who tolerated the ranch instead of loving it, children who were obligations instead of joys, a partnership of convenience instead of he stopped, but Emma finished for him, instead of love, she said softly. Jackson turned to look at her. You didn't ruin anything, Emma, you saved me. From a marriage that would have been wrong, from a life that would have been small and lonely even with another person in it. You and Sarah, you didn't crash into my life. You walked into it right exactly when you were supposed to. Emma kissed him then, the first time she'd done so, a gentle touch that held promise and gratitude and hope. The lawyer says maybe 6 more months. She whispered, I can wait 6 months. Jackson said, I can wait 6 years if I have to. You're worth waiting for. The divorce decree came through on a Tuesday morning in spring, nearly 2 years after that interrupted wedding. Doc Morrison brought it himself, riding out to the ranch with the official papers and a grin on his weathered face. Emma Wright is legally a free woman, he announced. Judge ruled in her favor on all counts. Mr. Daniel Wright is forbidden from contacting her or the child. On pain of arrest, Emma took the papers with shaking hands, staring at them as if they might disappear. Sarah, now 5 years old and full of opinions, tugged on Jackson's sleeve. Does this mean you can marry Mama now? She demanded. Because I've been waiting a very long time. Jackson laughed and scooped her up. Is that right? Sarah nodded seriously. Grandma Pearl says good things come to those who wait, but I think I've waited enough. Jackson looked at Emma over Sarah's head. What do you say? Think you might want to give marriage another try? With a different ending this time. Emma was crying and laughing at the same time. Are you asking? Jackson set Sarah down and, right there in front of Doc Morrison and his ranch hands and his beaming mother, dropped to one knee in the dusty ranch yard. Emma Wright, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Of making this ranch your home official-like? Of letting me be a father to Sarah and a husband to you, in the eyes of God and the law and everybody else? Emma pulled him to his feet and kissed him soundly. Yes, she said simply. Yes, yes, yes. The wedding took place in the same small chapel, exactly 2 years and 3 months after Jackson had stood at that altar alone. But this time, the pews were full of people who had watched their unlikely love story unfold, who had seen a family form from the ashes of broken dreams and desperate hope. This time, Jackson's mother wasn't crying from uncertainty, but from pure joy. This time, when the doors opened, it wasn't a stranger seeking help but Emma Wright, beautiful in a simple dress made from the fabric of what would have been Catherine's wedding gown, transformed by his mother's loving hands. And this time, Sarah walked ahead of her mother, scattering wildflowers and grinning so wide her whole face seemed to glow. This time when Jackson looked at the woman walking toward him, he saw his future, his partner, his love. Emma reached the altar and took his hand, and Jackson felt the rightness of it settle into his bones. Dearly beloved, the Reverend began, and Jackson barely heard the rest. He was too busy looking at Emma, seeing the way she looked back at him with complete trust, complete love, complete certainty. When it came time for the vows, he spoke them clearly, meaning every word. I, Jackson Cole, take you, Emma Wright, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do us part. Emma's vows were just as clear, just as certain, and when the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, the chapel erupted in cheers. Sarah launched herself at them both, and they caught her between them, a family now in every way that mattered. The reception was held at the ranch, under the wide Texas sky, with tables groaning under the weight of food and the sound of fiddle music carrying across the plains. Jackson danced with his new wife, then with his new daughter, then with his mother, who whispered in his ear, I'm so proud of you, son. You waited for the right one. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold, Jackson stood with Emma on the porch of their home, watching Sarah chase fireflies with the other children. Do you ever wonder, Emma asked softly, what would have happened if I hadn't stumbled into that chapel that day? Jackson pulled her closer. Every day, he admitted. And every day I thank God that you did. That you were brave enough to ask for help. That you were strong enough to stay. That you were willing to give love another chance. Even after everything you'd been through. Emma turned to face him, her eyes shining in the fading light. Do you know what I think about? She asked. I think about you, standing at that altar waiting for someone who wasn't coming, and I think about how sometimes the universe breaks our hearts so it can put us exactly where we need to be. Jackson kissed her softly. So you think it was fate? Emma smiled. I think it was grace, the kind that comes from being broken enough to be open to something different, something better, something real. They stood there as the stars began to emerge, as their wedding guests celebrated, as Sarah's laughter rang across the ranch that had become their home. And Jackson thought about that day 2 years ago, standing at the altar alone, humiliated and heartbroken, with no idea that his real life was about to crash through those chapel doors in the form of a desperate woman and a sick child. He'd thought he was waiting for Catherine Hartley, for the life he'd planned and imagined. But he'd really been waiting for Emma Wright, for the life he'd never known he needed. Sometimes, Jackson reflected, the greatest blessings come disguised as disasters. Sometimes the moments when everything falls apart are really the moments when everything falls into place. And sometimes, the person you're waiting for isn't the one you expect, but the one who changes everything just by walking through the door. The cowboy had waited at the altar alone, until she walked in and changed his life forever. And that had made all the difference in the world. If this story touched something deep in your heart, if it reminded you that even our darkest moments can lead to our greatest blessings, I have one request. Don't let this feeling pass without doing something with it. Share this story with someone who's going through a hard time, someone who's waiting for their breakthrough, someone who needs to remember that life has a way of working out in the most unexpected ways. Leave a comment below telling us about a time when something that seemed like a disaster turned into a blessing. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And please, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because every week we bring you stories that remind us what really matters. Stories about love, hope, and the beautiful unpredictability of life. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for believing that the best is yet to come. Until next time, keep your heart open, because you never know when your life is about to change forever.